This podcast is brought to you in association with VM Finance. VM Finance funds development and investment opportunities for residential, commercial and mixed-use properties and provides tailored support and innovative financing solutions to help you realise your vision and achieve your goals. To find out more about VM Finance, visit their website vmfinanceltd.com. Hello and welcome to Scheming, the Place North podcast that gives property folk a platform to talk about three schemes they think about a lot. I'm your host, Dan Whelan, Deputy Editor of Place Northwest. Today's guest is a real legend of Northwest property and is currently enjoying her second stint in the regen team at Manchester City Council. During a nearly 40-year career, that began as a planner at Cheshire County Council, this person has worked on regeneration and housing renewal projects across the north, from Rhyl to Teesside and pretty much everywhere else in between. Joining me today to talk about the three schemes that she thinks about a lot is Shelagh McNerney, Head of Regeneration for the Eastern Gateway at Manchester City Council. Shelagh, welcome to the pod.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely, you're more than welcome. So, before we get into the three schemes, I want to talk about your career a little bit. You've worked pretty much everywhere, in the public and private sector. What I want to know is, which is better, which is more fulfilling, public or private?
I can't answer it categorically, one or the other. I think at different times of our lives, maybe, different sectors suit us and our circumstances. So I began my career in the public sector, and I think the public sector is most certainly a brilliant place to begin. And to get an understanding of what civic duty is, all the different professional disciplines that have to work together to bring about change in a city. Again, it just depends. It depends which decade you're born into and what the economic circumstances are. A lot of young people these days who become, say, qualified town planners or surveyors, or they go directly into the private sector. And I think once you're in there in your 20s, you're probably not going to leave.
Right.
Because you earn more money, you earn bonuses, but I'd say that it gives you a particular perspective to have spent some significant time in the public sector.
Yeah, and that probably helps you then when you move into the private sector, maybe makes you a bit more empathetic.
I think so. I think understanding what the public sector is concerned with and what it's doing, what it's trying to achieve from any different professional background has changed over those decades, but it is what I found when I moved into the private sector is that there were many prejudices about the public sector, just as there are prejudices within the public sector about the private sector. And again, across different professional disciplines, how we all work together to improve our cities is really what we're about, and just understanding what the differences are. I mean, going back many, many decades, the town hall, city councils were filled with architects and professional teams who were directly delivering, delivering schools, delivering new buildings of all sorts. Nowadays, most of the job opportunities are in the private sector, but there is a question mark over the need for the public sector to grow again. So maybe we'll get into that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because one thing that always comes up whenever we do events is planning and the issues and how slow it is and how sluggish it is and the lack of resource, and you've just sort of highlighted it there. Is it simply a case of pay? If the public sector pays more, then the private sector will have a better ride because they'll get a better service?
I mean, you've picked out planning, obviously, because I trained as a town planner, but I didn't spend too long directly in planning services, and when I was in the public sector, a very short time in development control. So I actually dealt with minerals development control in Cheshire County Council, dealing with sand quarries and waste disposal.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it was just a very different experience. But to answer your question, there are resource issues in all local authorities, but again, it depends what part of planning you're talking about. So actually dealing with the surge of planning applications that come through the system, there are capacity issues, and there's a current debate at the moment with the new government, isn't there, about recruiting more planners, and certainly more will address some issues. My personal opinion is I don't think we need hundreds and thousands more planners in order to get development and investment going. Actually, what we need is the actual investment. It's like the actual money. And then there's another aspect I'm always interested in, which is actually the construction end of the process. So I'm one of those people who would say we probably do need some more planners, but we need many, many more bricklayers and scaffolders than planners.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the industry would agree with that. Yeah. We'll talk probably more about planning a little bit later on when we get into the 3 schemes. Before we do that, I was told recently that you become a bit obsessed with car parks, and I want you to tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, it's funny that should be said. That perception, that I know where that's come from, but I think whatever I'm working on, I just really get into whatever is in front of me and that we're delivering and that we have to do. So in my work at the moment in Ancoats, we've almost completed what's called the Ancoats Mobility Hub, which is a new approach to how people will park their vehicles, rent vehicles, go and get a bike in a particular local neighbourhood. So if you're thinking of renting or buying a flat in a particular neighbourhood, it's also thinking, am I taking a car with me? Maybe not, but maybe I want to rent a car, or maybe if I do have a car, then I will park it and it will be there will be a fee for paying for that. So all aspects of what these new mobility hubs are, how new neighbourhoods get developed out, what the future might be around car parking. I think I was sending photographs when I went to New York last summer for the first time ever. I absolutely love cities and history and visiting places, but I'd never actually been to New York, and I kept sending photographs of how they stack up their car parks right in the dense part of New York back to my boss, and she then thinks, flipping heck, Sheila, you're obsessed with car parks. But I was just looking at really dense cities, and the reality.
Most people would be taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, wouldn't they?
I did that as well. But it's the everyday of the streets and how they've developed out. And this is what you look at whenever you visit. And I'm forever on a busman's holiday. Honestly, anyone who's been on holiday with me, my family, friends, done loads of study trips with different groups of people, some journalists in the city, and it's great fun to visit anywhere, but I'm always looking at how does it work and why does this place feel great, and, can Manchester learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I look forward to my invite to Sheila McNerney's next development tour. Okay, so as you know, on today's podcast, I'm going to ask you about 3 schemes. They are one that you are most proud of, one that you wish you had done, and your dream project. So, without any further ado, let the scheming begin. So, Sheila, tell me about the project you're most proud of, please.
I have to say, and I know this is a bit of a compromise because it's unfinished, but I have to be most proud of what I'm working on at the very present moment. So I could talk about things in my past, but I'm most proud, and I apply most of my energies to what I'm doing right now. So I'm working Manchester City Council, completing Ancoats, and it feels like a huge honour and happenstance and circumstance. And I worked in New East Manchester back in 2001, 2002. I joined the City Council in 1997, just before the Blair government came into power. And so I worked for the City Council for 7 years at that time, and just when Manchester was inventing regeneration and how to do this sort of work. I then went off into the private sector and did a lot of different things. But circumstances came about where I've come back into the City Council and to be asked to lead a very small team and working with Homes England money and different partners in Ancoats Phase 3. It's really quite small geography. It's only about 6 streets. Okay. But we've got about 35 million going in from public sector, Homes England, brownfield land, working with different landowners. But the public sector are creating the most amazing environment. People won't know it's there at the moment, but just round the corner is going to be the most amazing new Ancoats Green Park, the mobility hub that I mentioned earlier, and greener, more pleasant streets, just at that bit that squeeze behind New Islington before you get into Miles Platting. So that's very hands-on delivery. Again, I've never been somebody who wants to work in, say, planning policy or develop policies. I've always liked to be involved in the delivery end. So in the council, that would be where there is funding, where you're doing stuff on the ground, procuring contractors, having arguments with architects. It's just great. I love that sort of work. And then at the same time, so it's finish Ancoats is the brief. and get Holt Town going again.
Okay.
So,
tell us about Holt Town,
Yeah.
because apart from there being a tram stop there,
Yeah.
people maybe don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think even a lot of Mancunians may not really know where Holt Town is. So it's the area squeezed between the back of the former retail park. It's got a tram line running through it, so New Islington, then Holt Town, then the Etihad. So that tram line, if you look out the windows either side, that's Holt Town that you're looking at. It's about 30 hectares of brownfield land. When I was a small child working in New East Manchester back in the early 2000s, it was a priority. It was one of the areas that were being looked at. But at that time, there were 16 different neighbourhoods being looked at for improvement. New East Manchester was huge geography.
Right.
And the constraints, the issues, the problems in Holt Town meant that it didn't get developed out as quickly as some of the other areas have over the years. Holt Town is a place where almost nobody lives. There are a few residents, so not to forget that they are there, but it's about 100 people. It's scattered businesses and industry, and again, not to forget the different businesses that are there. It's fundamentally contaminated, post-industrial kind of set of constraints. So how do you develop it out? It's 10 minutes from New Islington walking. How should we develop it out? What should go first? How do we get the investment together? So Manchester's really good at this, but it does need investment and it does need coordination. It's only the council that can really provide the pivotal kind of leadership and pulling it all together. Because if you look at it, the individual private owners themselves who may own land haven't done it yet. So they don't do it on their own. We have to come together with those partners, and that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. For anyone who doesn't know the area, still can't picture it, it joins up with the Etihad campus at the other end from the city, and it's where, until very recently, there were some really big gas holders on the skyline. If you haven't been up there recently, you might not notice a change, but they're not there anymore.
Right, none of them?
No.
Okay.
So National Grid have dropped those, iconic of that industrial age, so that's gone. But under the ground are still a lot of contamination and remediation that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
So how we plan that out is you'll know, because your organisation has covered through the press releases, covered the fact that we appointed Studio A Grey West, a multidisciplinary team, to develop a neighbourhood development framework. So this is a planning document that will set out the vision, what sort of place it should be, and we hope can attract funding from public, but also build confidence with the private sector.
So is the hope then that the private sector would come in and buy parcels of land and then develop, in line with that framework, in layman's terms?
We want the council no council can do this sort of work on its own, and Manchester has never done this work on its own. It has to work with, I would say, capable developers. So, and the city has many of those. So we want to work with capable developers and encourage landowners to see what they're sitting on as an asset and to bring it forward in line with the framework, which is about to go out to consultation. So next Monday, the consultation goes live. Okay. It'll run through to the end of September. I think you might be getting another press release that comes through about that going live. And only this morning, just before I came here, I've been going through the details on an online website that shows the public, businesses, landowners and others exactly what the proposition is and what we're thinking. They are ideas at the moment. They are a vision, and the City Council, under the leadership of Bev Craig, has been very clear that this is about regeneration, but it's looking to address all of those issues about affordable homes, mix of tenure, different types of homes, a mix with businesses, social infrastructure like health and schools, not being an afterthought. So all of that is built into the plan at the moment. We want to get people's feedback on that. Yeah.
So by the time this podcast comes out, by the time people listen to this, we'll know a bit more about the scheme, which is exciting.
Yeah.
The day that we're recording this, we've just reported this morning that Muse has been appointed to deliver the regeneration of Wythenshawe. Will you take a similar approach with Holt Town in terms of getting a development partner in to to drive the delivery?
I think Manchester's got a number of different area priorities. You'll know, for instance, like Victoria North is working with FEC, and again, that's taken some years to get to this point. Yet that fantastic announcement today about Wythenshawe, and it's got other areas that are further back in the planning process, further back in the development process, and they are not all the same, so we don't have a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. I think the reality in Holt Town is that we have got different partners, so we don't think at this stage that there will be a scenario where there is one single partner developer that can take forward the whole plan, because it's not just one single place.
And it's very large, isn't it?
Yeah,
as well?
It's a bit of a jigsaw. I mean, when you see it on a map, again, it depends which scale you go into, and it's not as big as Victoria North at all, and it's not as big as some of the other areas that Manchester has tackled before. When you think about New East Manchester, it's a really small part of that, but it's got complex issues, and so those complexities and what the vision is mean that it's unlikely to be one single development partner for the lot.
Okay.
And it's the jigsaw that has to be put together in as efficient a way as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a jigsaw within a piece of a jigsaw, because that's like the last piece of East Manchester, isn't it?
It's one of the last. We've called it one of the last major sort of zones for investment of that scale. Where you're talking about 30 hectares of brownfield land. You can talk about the assets. It's, as you said before, it's fantastic that it's got this tram line running through it already. We don't have to make a bid for further transport, but it's got other issues to do with the patchwork of ownerships and contamination.
Okay, yeah, so obviously challenging in that way, but also you mentioned that there's very few people who live there. There's businesses scattered around, but that must make it easier, mustn't it? You don't have to. You're not going to upset as many people, I guess. If you try and deliver something in the city centre, there's so many residents that you need to consult with. Yeah. So it's a bit more of a blank canvas, minus the contamination.
Well, I mean, none of this is easy, So I think the fact that we haven't got an existing, established community of residents, say on an estate, means that you can take different approaches. But we have got, we think it's around about 250 to 300 businesses.
Okay,
We've got 2,000 or 3,000 people who go to Holt Town to work in the businesses that are there at the moment, whether they are, for instance, big textile companies there. We've got a lot of metal bashing and car bashing and recycling. We've got artists in historic mill premises. We've got various retail outlets and social enterprises. So those sorts of businesses have clustered and come together in Holt Town because they're on the edge of the city centre. So if you kind of think what Ancoats was 30 or 40 years ago, people end up going to certain places because, that's maybe where the rents are a little lower. The challenge we've got is how do we regenerate an area, really improve it for everybody, without it then becoming unaffordable, or in fact becoming not cool. So it's the whole business of how we keep somewhere edgy and cool,
it's a balance, isn't
and
it?
Interesting without it becoming completely corporate.
Yeah, well, that's very true and relevant in the conversation with Ancoats, isn't it? Because Ancoats used to be this sort of no-go area to all intents and purposes, and now it's seen as a very cool quarter.
For sure, yeah.
And the word that gets thrown around is gentrification, and it's kind of how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that word gentrification is loaded, and people immediately react to it one way or the other. I'm a fan, an unapologetic fan of development, investment, and growth of the city. I think how we address affordability is a challenge and an issue. There are affordable homes in different localities and different places, and there are different tenures of homes, but Miles Platting up the road has got houses on the market at the moment where I can't quite believe the prices.
Right.
They're comparable with the apartments in the city centre. But again, it's kind of a 3-bedroomed house or a 3-bedroomed apartment. People want to live in different ways, have different demands, and I think that's the challenge for the future in terms of the council's housing strategy and looking at not affordability but also all different types of tenures. And again, it's my personal opinion that, some of the lower density suburban type areas need investment as well.
Okay, so we've spoken about Ancoats and Holt Town as the one you're most proud of, mainly because it's the one you're working on at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, as you mentioned, a bit of a homecoming.
Yes.
Having started out there, 20 odd years ago. Let's move on and let's talk about the one you'd wish you had done.
Again, I had to think about this for a while. There are many, really. But again, because of recent experiences, during lockdown, I decided to go and do an MA in architectural history, because at that point I was thinking, A, the world has gone mad, don't know what's going to happen next. My little bits of consultancy work here and there and what I was doing weren't possible during a lockdown. And I'd started the MA in architectural history because I've always been so fascinated with cities, and it seemed to bring it all together. And I did a homecoming then, because in 1983 I left Liverpool, went to London to train to be a town planner at University College London, and during lockdown I went back to the same university to do a part-time MA.
Mm-hmm. And most of us, Sheila, during lockdown were baking banana bread.
Yeah, exactly, baking banana bread in the garden.
You were
but
doing
I was buying architectural history books on Amazon and getting loads of deliveries during lockdown of books. But I decided to do the course full time because lockdown came about, and my thesis was in connection with Manchester Town Hall. And there I was, not knowing that I would, following year, be going back into Manchester Town Hall and sitting there and looking at it wrapped up in scaffolding. And, it's become this like iconic kind of sculpture in the city. So I studied it. And having studied it, I think I'd have to say I would love to have been in the meetings and in the room with the radical mayor, Abel Hayward, and the architect, Waterhouse. And we can't imagine what the city was like then. And, we read our history books, it's like the poverty-stricken, but the radical people who dragged it out of that poverty and addressed all those social issues and were driven by their kind of social consciences and wanted to build a town hall and built the town hall. And when you read about the details of it, it is quite amazing the kind of commitment they had to, we are going to build this most amazing Gothic town hall in this location. And they had an architectural competition and Waterhouse won it. They had a big debate about the style and what it should be. But I used to, as I was reading all this stuff during the misery of lockdown, I was not a fan of it because I'm very sociable, I like to go out, I kind of just spent a lot of time imagining what the city was like then and what these people were like to be so driven. And this is, again, I suppose brings us back to the contemporary time about having ambition and really, really imagining a future and having people who come together and say, look, we're going to overcome these problems and we're going to do this. And that's what Manchester did and continues to do in all sorts of ways. It's just that the town hall, for someone interested in architecture, is just so amazing.
Absolutely.
I think we've all forgotten what it is, haven't we? Because it's wrapped up in white.
Yeah. Well, and it has been for so long, and I think another couple of years yet. It's taking a while. There might be people out there who argue, why is this amount of money being spent on restoring this old building when, like you said before, we need affordable homes, we need other things. Yeah. What would you say to that?
I think it's worth it. The building was built at the time it was.
Yes, 1868 to 1877.
At a time when, there was enormous poverty and degradation across the city and people lived in back-to-back houses and it's kind of, I don't think one thing equals the other thing. I think you can have your civic ambition as well as address the real problems, and those people were seeking to address those problems as well. That's where Manchester's radical history comes from. My personal judgment on this and view on this is, it was that the town hall was essentially not maintained for, over 100 years. So if you take the cost and divide it by 100, it's what it should have been spent on it every year. It's like if you don't maintain a building, it's going to take a lot to deal with it. And there may be a lot of people who disagree with me. I don't think there is, though, at the moment. I think it's one of those where it's going to be worth it when it's opened. It's an enormous piece of history, like, say, the Houses of Parliament or something, or Westminster Abbey, or Manchester Town Hall, to my mind, is as important as that in our collective history. Yeah. And in any case, we are committed, and we may as well get it finished now. And I think when it's revealed, we should say it's worth it, and it is worth it. And then it's not even just the current moment, current generation. It's another 150 years of people who will be visiting. I mean, imagine what somebody says in 50 years' time when they go and see that. What will they think? And it was an option at times. Even after the Second World War, there were plans to demolish it.
Wow.
briefly, and they're going to put up a modern kind of town hall. That didn't last very long. And then what to do about the terrible cost of dealing with something that was so antiquated. And that's what's being addressed at the moment. I mean, every single item was taken out. I mean, imagine beginning your building project and you have to remove 20,000 items.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about the work.
You know how bad it is when you do an extension or something at home, and it's like you've got to take everything out the cupboard.
Yeah, this is a complete other level, isn't it? Yeah, it's we're all excited to see it revealed again. Like you say, it's maybe only in Manchester could something covered in scaffolding become kind of a bit iconic in its own right.
Yes.
But yeah, we're all excited to see that finish in a couple of years' time, hopefully. Moving on, the final scheme is the dream scheme. So this is one that has not been done by you or anyone else, but you would like to have the opportunity to tackle. And it can be anything that you want. So what's your dream scheme?
Again, I thought about this. Friends and colleagues of mine will think they know what I'm going to say, but I'm not going to say a swimming pool. I'm not saying a swimming pool.
A swimming pool where? I'm intrigued.
Outdoor swimming pools are
like
so needed.
A Lido, yes.
Oh, they're so needed around here. Anyway, that's not the one I'm doing. But the one I'm doing is, I think, in terms of a kind of fantasy, idealistic view of the future and what we should be doing, is around new towns. And the new government has referred to new towns in terms of housing strategy nationally. But I, again, because I've studied town planning and history, anyone who's done town planning knows about the new town movement, knows about the Garden City movement before it. Coincidentally, my daughter has just moved out to London and she's moved to Letchworth Garden City with 2 small babies. And, these garden cities were created and built in the early 1900s by radical visionary architects and planners and thinkers. And a lot of the features are still just exactly what humanity needs to live in a nice place, in terms of the streets, the houses, the facilities, the thinking about design. And I can't understand why we can't kind of think in a really visionary way, very long term. And again, as people are listening, they're probably thinking, oh, pie in the sky, and it's all about pounds per square foot and who owns the land and green belt, grey belt, all the rest of it. But we've got a huge amount of brownfield land still in the country. I think there is a very solid argument for some green belt being used and that we should be building new towns. But I'd like to see real scale of new towns and real scale of thinking about design of those new towns. And we've done it before, so there's no reason why we can't do it again, apart from the fact that we also need people to build them. And this is where it's not just about planners and architects. I'd come back to the scaffolders, bricklayers, highway engineers, people who know how to unblock a pipe. We need skills, and this would be the most fantastic project for every single 16 to 25-year-old in the country, boys and girls, to actually be recruited into a huge programme of building new towns across the country. I think, obviously I'm talking in an idealistic way.
Yeah. Although this is what Labour wants to see this happen.
Yeah, I just think the scale, to make, the ideal should be held to, and I don't think we should worry about being criticised by maybe some property types who say, that it'll never happen, or we can't afford it. So the other part is, kind of how do we afford anything? But again, you kind of think where Manchester and the country have come from in terms of deciding what's important. I think if you've got to have a vision before you you can put together the plans, ideas, and then find the money. But we need so many more new homes for so many different communities across the whole country. I feel as if it needs to be a big national programme.
Yeah. It can't be piecemeal, it has to be a big push.
I think it needs to be a big national programme, and I think I said 100 new towns across the country, employing a whole group of those young people who are strong and fit before they get groggy, before they get into the mid and late 20s and don't come away from the PlayStation or whatever. It's like actually physical work.
Yeah.
And it sounds ever so old-fashioned, doesn't it?
A little, yeah.
But how do we build houses unless we have people who know how to physically build stuff? And we don't.
Well, yeah, the construction
we don't have
industry
enough of them.
has a massive skills shortage, doesn't
Massive
it?
skill shortage, yeah. So this is where I make the point. We need planners and architects, but we also need people who can fix a tap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't fix a tap.
Neither can I.
That's a lie, actually. I did fix my bath tap not too long ago. I was very proud of myself. I mean, the biggest barrier to this is probably politics. We saw...
Money.
Money, yes, of course, and the viability argument. But we saw last year, didn't we, when the Conservatives were still in power, the power that the backbenchers had. They pushed for reforms in the NPPF, and they came to pass. They've been reversed now. But that NIMBYism, people don't like the term, but that NIMBYism, people don't. We recognise as a housing crisis, but a lot of people don't want to see houses built close to them. How do we overcome that?
I don't think there's a quick fix, but I think we've reached this position over many decades where people have lost faith in the idea of the new, have lost faith in the idea of a future even, so and that's the bit that's missing, I think. So that kind of post-war consensus around new towns and even when there was garden villages, there was the vision and the idea that we are going to get behind the idea of building something new and build a brave new world. There was a level of consensus, and that's what's fallen to pieces, I think. And there's a lack of faith that anything new is good, and in some cases they're right. In some cases we have not built things well over the last 40 to 50 years.
Well, yeah, if you look, there's not many Manchester cathedrals being built in 2024.
Yeah, but even just if we're talking about villages or new villages or new homes. We're basically talking about new homes. So I think there's a lack of faith that new build homes are as good as, say, Victorian homes, and we've not built enough. And then there's an attachment to old forms because everybody likes a street, and then the cost of those have gone through the roof because we haven't built enough. So I think it just comes back to a lack of confidence in the new. And I think this phrase about building back beautiful or building, this phrase beauty in building and planning, I know where it came from, and it was to try and address and say that we can build new and it can be beautiful, and nobody believes it. Nobody thinks that the new can be beautiful. And I think, again, with our architects and planners and how we do things, that we need to revisit all of that. Because we do know how to build really great places.
We just need the people to do it.
Yeah.
And the programme.
Concerted effort.
Yeah.
And understanding and it not being piecemeal, it does need to be comprehensive. Yeah. So I'm a great fan of huge comprehensive planning. It's like state control.
Absolutely. No. Well, Sheila, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for scheming with me.
Yeah.
And thank you at home very much for listening. Please do join us next week for another episode of the Scheming Podcast. This podcast is brought to you in association with VM Finance. VM Finance funds development and investment opportunities for residential, commercial and mixed-use properties and provides tailored support and innovative financing solutions to help you realise your vision and achieve your goals. To find out more about VM Finance, visit their website vmfinanceltd.com.